From the vibrant streets of Brooklyn to the prestigious stage of Carnegie Hall, today's guest on Music from Humans is a true maestro of melody and motion. Join us as we explore the multifaceted world of Christopher North, a composer whose notes have colored the realms of film, concert halls, and beyond. Christopher North, a Texan by birth but a New Yorker by choice, has been shaping soundscape since his arrival in New York City in 1997. With a repertoire that spans over 60 films and 20 genre-crossing albums, his musical genius doesn't just echo through the halls of Carnegie, it resonates around the world. A composer, songwriter, conductor, and multi-instrumentalist, Christopher's a chameleon musician that's just as comfortable at CBGB's as he is performing The Lion King on Broadway. Chris gives back to the music community by teaching the next generation of composers and songwriters at Berklee College of Music. A Grammy nominee known for his eclectic albums and profound film scores, Christopher's recent work for Max Roach, the Drum Also Waltzes, not only aired on PBS American Masters, but also clinched the Best Music Documentary at the 2023 IDA Documentary Award. But what compels a man who's played with legends like Quincy Jones and Rosanne Cash to find solace in the wilderness of Alaska? Inspiring compositions that speak of glaciers and the silence of snow. Today, Christopher North opens up about his journey, his inspirations, and his personal moments that shape the music he crafts. Christopher, so glad that you could come in and talk to me. I think of all the composers that I could talk to or know, you would be the one that I have known the longest.
That is an amazing distinction.
Yes.
And our paths have crossed in many different ways over the years too. So
very, very much so. And we go all the way back to our college days. You moved off to New York, started your great career as a film composer and eventually a teacher as well. And of course, you're still doing concert music. It's an amazing career that you've had so far up in New York, being a Texan. So one of the things that we did a lot was go camping and do camping trips. You know, we had all those great times at Big Bend. And, you know, I know that nature is still real important to you. And I remember you went on a retreat to Alaska to hang out in the wilderness and compose music. And you created wonderful piece. And if I understand correctly, it's still ongoing. You may continue to write some more about it. But would you like to talk about this wonderful piece that you...
Sure. I mean, for me to think about my relationship to nature as well, and the irony, of course, being that I'm a New Yorker, which means I'm surrounded by concrete lots of the time. I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention, you know, an important figure in my life that helped set that love of nature, which of course is my father. My mom, of course, also did all kinds of nature things too, including fishing. But there was a lot of camping trips through the good old YMCA. At the time, it was called Y Indian Guides. That is another whole,
I did that.
another whole conversation. But the thing about that I was very thankful for is, of course, some pivotal friendships that came from that in my early years. Another place that was not necessarily school related, but we did camping trips at least probably twice a year, you know. And I think the interesting part of that with our other mutual friend that we're connected through, Michael Alves and I, of course, did some camping trips too, but the three of us went to Big Bend several times. And I think the thing that's been really helpful that you learn from camping is, first of all, improvisation, survival, and quick thinking, and also make the best of the lemons and make the most awesome. So there's sometimes some incredible lemonade. And I do remember quite a few of these camping trips with the Y guides where, you know, it was just everything was going wrong. I mean, like everything, like the rain, but my dad would make these huge breakfasts, and there would be some kind of hiking, but there was also a lot of canoeing. My dad and I also went on several canoe trips, and one where he even had the canoe with the knee pads like glued into the boat structure, stuff like that. So there was a lot of paddling, and so my connection to water, to nature, I see that still as a regular part of my life. It's different now, in terms of what does it mean to live in a city and then be close to water. So whether that's or teaching in Boston and be close to water. So to live in a city, to me, growing up in Dallas, this sounds like a diss to Dallas, but it's important to have some connection to nature and to water specifically, which is why in Dallas, I would often go to White Rock Lake. I like the circles of water. I like going around a thing. I like the bicycling. I like running. I like TRX cables. I like anything that involves circles and water and flow. And of course, even Governor's Island is another place that I get to experience nature. But there's this Alaska trip is a thing called the Composing in the Wilderness. That also has an interesting Texas, Alaska, New York connection in a couple of different ways. I was the special guest of the Nacogdoches Film Festival through another mutual friend. Found out about that festival. Happens to be the oldest town in Texas, and even has 9 flags over that, which is a longer story. But went to Nacogdoches, and of course Stephen F. Austin is there, and I knew some folks that went there, but was able to connect with Dr. Stephen Lias, who's the head of Composing in the Wilderness, and created this amazing program where you take composers and go out in nature and do stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, this would be an amazing way to connect some dots. So, and I will share that I did like my first GoFundMe for that. So I did reach out to the community of just saying, hey, and this was kind of an important step in my own New Yorker gestation. I very clearly put large parts of my soul and my outdoor life on hold in my New York life. In other words, I'd never really, figured out how to get how to have enough camping gear in a small New York apartment. I have a bunch of but having camping gear in New York City was a challenge. And so I would say that this GoFundMe, as well as the Composing in the Wilderness program, allowed me to kind of at least get up to entry point with camping gear, hiking gear, water gear, et cetera, et cetera. And that course has continued since that time. But I found out about this by Stephen F. Austin. Dr. Lias has this program, found out about it. And even though there was some trepidation just in terms of being one of the older folks that was doing the program, I felt confident about my health level to be able to do all that stuff. So, and it was great. It was like sign up for this thing, go have this experience, a little bit of bonding as well as context, with Alaska history. And of course, I don't have all the names of the cities in my brain right now, but essentially it was, you go out and hang out in one place and learn about Alaska, go to Alaska Museum, and then eventually made our ways to Prince William Sound through this little, this very special city there that is only accessible via a tunnel that they shut down at midnight. And
I have been there.
Yeah.
It's got like one big building in it. Everybody lives in the same building.
The same building. So that's where we went
Yep.
through. Then we took off on this big adventure, and it was just great to bond with the other composers there and have different perspectives on things, and really just to kind of cut it to the inspiration for the piece. There was a moment where a really wonderful Alaska Geographic guide stopped our kayaks, and said, this is where the glacier was, this Nellie Juan is the name of the glacier. This is where Nellie Juan was the last time I was here. And then we kept going. And, this was only in the course of a few years that it receded that much. And you can look at discernible maps and see where the glacier was versus where the glacier is, and you could say more about the piece, but that was at least kind of a whole thing of what did it mean to go to Alaska and experience a whole bunch of stuff. We were, kayaking, bringing everything in and everything out, watching the water line, having fires below the water line. And then, of course, the sun would only go down for a little while. And that would be another whole part of the experience. And then we kind of had like the almost like the MTV house experience where all these composers, there's like 3 chapters to the trip. There's the Alaska, kind of get to know each other, these actual kayaking plus some kayaking prep, and then the little retreat afterwards to spend a little bit of time in a house together, starting the piece or having fun or some combination of the 2 things. And that was that. And then of course we had presented the piece in November in Federal Hall, and that's the part that connects it. So Federal Hall in New York is of course where the folks who dreamt up some things about Alaska and about the National Parks Service there's a connection there to the National Park Service as well as Alaska, to Federal Hall and to Roosevelt and other folks that I'm probably not getting right on the history, but nevertheless, there's a connection there. So,
that's very
Texas,
cool.
Alaska, New York, there's actually some connection there. So, yeah.
Well, it sounds like the experience gave you multiple angles of inspiration to pull from. It's always great. It's always lovely to be able to have an experience that you can write from. I know one of another interview I did from a friend composer who left the city and moved up into the wilderness in California, wrote an entire piece just based on living in the Sierras that she called Sierra Rhapsody. So how did you translate these experiences into music?
Right. So, I mean, it's interesting because I'm definitely, have a background as a composer, also as a songwriter, also as someone fully aware of the power of just sound in itself. But if I'm honest, at first it was more the notion of the piece, but there was a couple of things that happened during the trip that I knew were going to play a role in just the whole thing, and some of that was even related to songwriting. So, which is to say, I brought it's like right over, I think I could probably get it. I brought a what's called an outdoor ukulele, which is a small clear plastic ukulele that was on my kayak, and that was it literally is waterproof, et cetera, et cetera. There was one of the guides there, actually 2 of the guides that had their young daughter there, and she was like this. I forgot her name right. I think her name was Stella. It was probably with Stella. That's ringing a bell right now. At any rate, she was like this nature princess. Just like Alaskan 5-year-old, bug bites all over her, and yet she was just like this force of nature, and she'd go down into the kayaks. So it was and that was definitely part of it. And I ended up just making up music on the spot for her entertainment. So we'd all be hanging out on the shore. I would just do stuff with my ukulele and make up songs on the spot. We did eventually have a song that was related to Hey Bear. It was all about bear patrol when you're using the latrine and stuff like that. So I think there was always the notion of an adventure and yet melody, and yet there was also things where even on the last night hanging out with the other composers, we stayed up super late and we were just throwing rocks into the water and then trying to imitate the sound of that was more like all the different and so that was interesting. So I do think and then there was just this notion of cognitive dissonance, of just like looking at something so beautiful and knowing something so wrong, and even the title of my piece is this notion of Scratchiti. So in New York, of course, we have graffiti, and since the trains changed, there's no longer the any kind of paint, other kind of marking can actually be easily cleaned off. Well, maybe not easily. I would not presume to know the people that do it, but suffice it to say, you don't see the same kind of graffiti on trains anymore. However, what you do see is Scratchiti, which is people scratching into glass and scratching into even metal too. So that's another form of graffiti. And so it's interesting we were going down these waterways to get to the glacier, and some of them are carved through in the typical way that you would associate with a fjord or otherwise, And I was seeing these scratches, and it just kind of got me thinking about, historical uh, communication from nature of basically saying, I'm going to leave a mark, and what is the mark that I'm going to leave, and yet the maps of what the maps were doesn't lie. The Scratchiti of the Glaciers doesn't lie. And yet we're sitting in a place where, it was also the driest August on record. In other words,
Yeah.
we bought all this water gear, literally like, I'm kind of imagining like the guy, Horton's, whatever it is that sells the fish or the tartar sauce. Like it's got like all
Right.
the gear. Like we had all that stuff, right? So we had all that stuff. And guess what? We did not need it once. So that's all to say that, that wild adventure was part of it. And that was exhibited in this young daughter of this guide, and just a kind of a go for it adventure. There was also the notion of sounds and just sound for the sound's sake. Then there was, of course, this, how does one exhibit cognitive dissonance in music of just something is beautiful, but something's really off,
Uh-huh.
and I think that's something I can kind of lean into some film things. And sometimes you can do that by having sections of music that oscillate between two things. I find myself attracted to the notion of even what Schumann would do with the two different personalities. And can you do that within the same phrase? Or can you do that on a form situation? Or can you do that in a hodgepodge section where it all kind of happens the same together? And that was a big thing. And then switch to another thing. And you're suddenly juxtaposing all those experiences. And that's part of what I experienced in Alaska was, wow, this is gorgeous. And there's something terribly, terribly wrong. Like there's something right about this, and just once again, seeing huge chunks of ice coming off, and even the way that ice makes sounds and all of those things. So that really played a role into it. And you'll even in this could kind of get more specific about the score, is even some of the doublings as well as some of the intervallic relationships, some unexpected transitions, and then some parts where you were going to have a little bit more diatonic approach to things, followed by things that are much more just more expanded harmonic, melodic language. And then of course just the kind of the humor of having a small splash cymbal, you know what I mean, which was kind of this other thing of like that was part of the instrumentation situation with specific to Federal Hall, which is to say, Federal Hall, we can have a drum percussion that fits within a small drum kit framework, plus vibraphone, and yet kind of your abbreviated drum kit, plus maybe a special or two or three kind of a thing for the orchestra, because it needed to be portable and yet get in and outable in a place that's a historical record, kind of a place where don't scratch the floors, don't do any of this other stuff. So that meant that there was some specifics of the instrumentation, which as much as my brain was on, Pierrot quintet kind of a sound, it just took a little bit of a switch to just go, okay, wait. And I actually know now, to kind of piggyback on one thing I said earlier, is the Glacier Was Here piece would definitely be pro quintet plus percussion. So that would be the other thing that would definitely add. So that is the piece that it still has sketches and just needs to find a slice of my life to do that. But and maybe another visit to Alaska. That's the other part too.
When you were there, did you take notes or put some musical ideas down while you were there to take, when you take home to compose the piece?
I definitely did. I mean, I still there was some chord structures. Once again, I had the aforementioned ukulele with me. I don't think that inspired too much of the piece too, but I think there was some noodly little single line things that I came up with there. But more importantly, I also had my melodica with me, which I pretty much take everywhere too. So as a bass player who made a living as a bass player, and that what it takes to move a bass around New York City is another whole thing. I love the fact that now I get to sometimes just show up with a score and a baton. That's awesome. But I pretty much can't go anywhere without some kind of little portable instrument. Now, whether that's harmonica or backpack guitar, which I have, whole parts of my website that have reels dedicated to all of these instruments. As a multi-instrumentalist, that's just part of my flow. But I did have a melodica, and I remember specifically, going out on a particular porch of this MTV house that we had. It was like a multi-story house. It literally was like, I can't. What was that? What was that MTV show? I can't remember the name of it.
Oh, right, where everybody lived in the same house,
something like that. But it was basically like a bunch of composers, and there was a particular porch that I went out to, and I'd have my little coffee, and I'd have the both. I did have my laptop with me, but at that point, still I really wasn't putting anything into Sibelius yet. It was more just the notion of, here's some harmonic structures, here's some rhythmic structures, and I do think there was definitely a couple of rhythms and a couple of harmonic structures, and even this notion of a larger formal thing. I think I already started thinking about the larger piece, but ultimately took some of those elements into Nellie Juan's Scratchiti, which is what the main movement that's out in the world right now, that once again is orchestrated for alto sax and percussion, as well as violin, cello, and flute. So that was the notion there, and I think, as attractive as it was to think about other kinds of doublings, I think I ended up went a little bit more simpler, and so even with the percussion part too,
right. We had to target your hall and the performers you had, right? So not all works can be your big orchestra works that you sometimes do. So,
and I will say that I had a little bit of a secret weapon there, which is that the other composers, having not been to that space, I had been to that space and knew what the sound would be. And even upon showing some of my early sketches to other folks, were like asking some questions. That's interesting. I was like, well, I know the space this is going to be in, and I know what this is going to sound like right there, and I knew the reverb time and how effective certain things may be or not, and was able to use that as part of the piece, and that was already in my ear. I do, just the notion of going through these kind of not ravines, but these like fjord-like canals, and hearing these bird sounds and the way it was bouncing off of sounds. And then just this notion of the splash, and, was it a small splash from a small piece of ice coming off, or a small rock falling off? Or was it a big splash from a larger piece of larger glacier coming off at the wrong time of year, or just at all? And I think I kind of went, that was the choice of the splash symbol, which is like a small little splash. So, but I kind of went more metaphorical with the larger sounds, meaning like, what does it mean to have the bass drum and a big chord and the whole thing, and just knowing how that would sound in this particular space. So there was definitely orchestration decisions based on prior knowledge of the space it was going to be in, which, as I said, was information I had that other composers didn't necessarily have. So,
well, it's going to be, this is great. All this information, when I go back and re-listen to your piece again, this will just open it up to me so much more. I get real excited when you get some of the insider information, you can revisit the piece. But I think what you're saying is one of those important lessons for composers is when you get a commission or something that you really kind of need to research that group, figure out what their strength is. You need to write it for those players, for that hall, because you can get such a better performance out of that when you're not just writing what exactly. I mean, you should always write what you want, but you're not just writing whatever. You're tailoring it to the ensemble that you're working with. And I've definitely played some pieces and worked with some composers who I'm just writing this whatever, and I was like, it's not the best fit for this group that you're writing for.
I think and some of that's also tailored from everything I've learned for film scoring, you know what I mean? Which is to say, we've got this much time, we have this much budget, what is the most important element here? And that can be everything from, okay, we've got some sample libraries here, but let's have a live performer here. Is this, oh wait, a nonette recorded really well in a great stage is going to sound a lot better than trying to have more pieces playing more notes. Like the choosier notes with a 9-piece is going to sound great. And I experienced even something like that, even at Skywalker Ranch doing the Sundance Lab of like, wow, a smaller ensemble, but recorded really well in the film particular, but also for recording sessions has a different sound, and a different way that it fills in. So, but it's really important to, it's easy to impose ego on anything, but that doesn't actually mean that you're going to get hired again,
Yeah.
And also that you're acknowledging the reality of the commission, whatever that is, in terms of the instrumentation and the personalities involved. With this particular group, most of them come from another, I think the official name for the ensemble is Corvus, but that was with a couple of folks that had worked with Corvus. And then, of course, there's a little bit of different folks that they bring in at different times. But knowing that there was going to be a percussionist, and that in some cases, when not otherwise, the percussionist is acting as the de facto conductor because of the nature of some of the things. And knowing that also meant that the non-metered sections, I made sure that there was clarity. How do I achieve this effect, the intended effect, and having clarity on when time starts back up again, and knowing that in some cases, who is the instigator of time in the next section, and that in many cases that would be the percussionist that would set that up. So that was all based on just having been to the concert times before, just like, and paying attention, just going like, okay,
yeah,
so
yeah, I think that's just very important when you have that. And again, you pointed out another thing that us composers do a lot, when especially we're working on some techniques going in and out of aleatoric style sections, is how is that going to happen? How is that going to be conducted? And it's always then, well, how do I pull this off? How does this group go to this group, and how do people know when to change? And spend a lot of time thinking about that type of work. So I mean, that's a big piece of the composing, is not just the music, but then how can it be performed? How can it be put together?
Right.
I'm working on a tape and orchestra piece right now, and that's one of my biggest concerns. It's meant to be live. I probably could learn a lot from someone like you in the film scoring on how to pull that, because it is also supposed to be synced with the tape very well. There's parts where the orchestra cuts out and then the tape just says something. People come back, so everything has to be timed well. It can't be completely aleatoric. And so figuring all that out is a big part of composing.
And the tech tools, and also monitoring tools, and specifics of where it's eventually what is the overall effect, and then how to pull it off. I have very happy to live in Brooklyn as long as I have. One of the cooler things that happened over the last few weeks was the Long Play Bang on a Can music festival.
Yeah, that's a great festival.
It's just amazing. And I'm sitting there just like kicking myself, going like, oh my God, this is like I biked to all of the events, and it was a big rainy day, but it was all packed, and a couple of new spaces, and saw friends and blah, blah, blah. There was one particular piece, which I will not call out, that did have a tech aspect in terms of headsets with different kinds of rhythmic relationships against a fixed click in certain sections, and then some metric modulation and a bunch of other stuff happening behind the scenes. But the tech went out, and they had to restart the piece. And this is a longer piece that had an intended effect. And it's just interesting, like what to do especially if you've only got a one-off situation or a two-off situation, and even a dress rehearsal is not enough to know that nothing's going to go wrong, and you have backups and stuff like that, And even though this might be a funny juncture to mention, some of my other side work is, of course, playing bass and Broadway. And there was a particular night where I was playing Lion King, and we get to the intermission, and they test Pride Rock or whatever it was, and it was not going up. So, or no, it was before the show or whatever. So Pride Rock would not erect. And so it meant that we started the show 30 minutes late. And so it's interesting, even at that level, something can go wrong such that, how do you have backups for that? And how do you make sure that the stuff goes right? So,
Yeah.
but for this particular piece, obviously, I wanted some shorter, time-based aleatoric sections, non-measured sections, and with clear distinctions on who would set up the next thing, and some of that was just knowing we've got minimal recording rehearsal time. How do I pull this off in a super, super fast way, at any rate, and they did it. That's great. So
I'm trying to remember the score now. Unfortunately, it's been like a month since I looked through it. Did you use box notation for that? Measure of with the notes and then sort of like a line for how long they're supposed to noodle with that? Or
yeah,
use
exactly.
that idea?
With
Okay.
approximate,
Yeah, I always call that box notation.
yeah, with approximate notions of, okay, flute and alto is going to do it 4 times approximately, based on a number of proportional spacing of knowing that, okay, and vibraphone's going to do it 5 times, and maybe violin does it 3 times, and violoncello does it 3 times. So it was a proportional boxes of non-metered bars with approximate number of repetitions towards a certain amount of time, and then some kind of an ensemble figure that indicates a breath followed by a gesture together, and then the next thing starts up together, and a little bit more kind of Brahmsian in terms of these 2 instruments doing this, these 2 instruments doing this, and blocky, easier handoffs. So were it not
Right.
for the other limitations, or at least just understanding of what was going to pull it off best in the amount of time, may have done that differently, but it became clear that this, when winds versus strings versus when alto versus soprano versus tenor versus bass kind of delineation of orchestration of materials, that's the way that kind of worked out. And you'll see that clearly in the score,
I think that technique works fabulous. I use it a lot when I'm mixing notated and aleatoric stuff all the time. I think it's a great way of getting that effect that you want in notation. I think it becomes clear to people. So yeah, that's excellent.
I'm still looking ways of integrating more, drawn things and then turning that into graphics that then get imported into scores. And I'm still not where I'd like to be with that, but do love the notion of graphic scores too. I mean, I think that's another frontier that I may be looking at too.
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine who does fabulous graphic scores. He does a couple of different styles, but I have a whole interview with him to talk about his map scores. We use map elements and music notation. He feels that places can really inspire stuff. And I've done just what you talk about. I use Finale still, but certainly imported different graphics and layouts for things where I'm wanting to have some graphical representation. I have this piece called String Theory, which is supposed to be like something about the quantum level of physics and representation of music. And I use a lot of squiggly lines and dots and things like that for certain aspects and sections of it. And those are all done that way with importing those graphics into the music. A bit of a challenge to do, but I figured out how to make Finale do everything I wanted. So this took a while.
That's cool. And I mean, I still have this idea of like what would it be like to draw things and then import that into Sibelius. And so that's kind of an ongoing process that I'm working on. And
my recommendation for that is to draw it in something that you can do like a vector graphic.
Yep.
And then you can import that vector graphic. You can then blank out the staff, and then you can stretch it and scale it the distance that you want. That's basically how I did the stuff for the string theory. It worked pretty well. So just an idea that we can try and see if it works as the way you might want. But I assume it's a little hard to find time to do some concert work music.
It is. I mean, I think maybe one other framework to look at everything like right now. I am not. I think some of the attention that Leonard Bernstein got because of the recent film, and just people thinking about Bernstein again. I mean, of course, I still go back and watch the Harvard lectures like regularly.
Yeah, so do I.
Probably like 1 year, all of them. Just like, but And there's some other connections I have to him with folks that knew him. But the point being is that I think one of the ideas that I kind of got from watching that film, as well as just to kind of re-upped in my mind, is the fact that whether it's teaching or conducting or composing or playing, it's all one thing to me now. And I think that's the one thing that I don't necessarily beat myself up as much as I used to about, well, you're not getting as much done in this one area of your life, you're not getting as done in this other area. It's like, it's all one thing to me now. And I don't see as much of a difference between some of the teaching that I do and conducting that I do and helping out a filmmaker versus helping out a fellow composer. And yes, you know, I if I'm honest, I can say that I do find it exhausting to be the leader of everything. So that I really like to be a team player with some projects and have good balance between things where I'm facilitating and the collaborator versus other things where I'm the one in charge of everything. And I certainly don't need that for my ego. I really don't. You know,
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm actually because again, I've got lots. I run my little symphony orchestra here in SF and all these other projects, and I'm always like, oh God, I really want to play with some groups, but I don't want to build the band. I just want to. Hey, can I be a side man again?
Right. So that's, you know, and there's some other life stuff. I mean, I can, you know, just to balance everything like that, whether that's relationships or parenting or freelancing and just making a living in New York City, to this strange double life I have of living in Brooklyn and of course teaching in Boston, which I definitely get a kind of a thrill from. And I happen to be a person that's highly productive on trains. So this would not be possible were it not for that strange thing of I get on a train and I got 4 hours and I actually look forward to that time, which sounds probably very strange to some people. What's interesting is there's also a whole bunch of us that do this, right? And I have tried to facilitate just awareness of what folks are there, you know. And there was one train one time that where they needed to replace the engine. And so, or you know, they had to it was coming into Providence or whatever. And I sent a couple of texts and then I realized who was on that same train. We all met up and, you have a lot of people that are really bummed about this train. You have another 5 or 6 Berkeley professors who all live in New York, who all happen to be on the same train, who are ecstatic with the notion of getting to spend time together because they have no excuse to. And it was amazing. We're like laughing and joking. We get back on the train, we're still laughing and joking, and the people on that train got off because we were too loud. And it's like, so it's a really interesting camaraderie of and energy to have a relationship with 2 cities. And I do have a little dream of, what would it really be like to be more of a guest conductor who gets to get to know other orchestras in the way that orchestra that I get to work with, and or of course more film work in LA too. I mean that's or London. That is all part of the larger goal of everything. So time will tell.